come to order at our general meeting of the Milo Baker Chapter of the Native Plant Society. And we're very pleased that so many of you have turned out in the rain. This is wonderful. So, does anybody have any announcements? Catherine? Okay, well, come on up. So Catherine and Virginia are in charge of our outreach and education programs. And coming up is the science fair. And I bet that's
Our big event.
our big event. It's huge. So this is Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine, and I'm going to briefly summarize what's on this flyer. If you're interested, I have some more flyers here in my hand, and then there's also some on the table that you passed when you first came into the room.
I've already failed.
So what we're looking for is plant specimens for the North Bay Science Discovery Day, which this year is on March 9th, 2024. And our theme centers on native plants that occur in riparian corridors. And so we would like to display representatives of wetland, creekside, or riparian forest species. So this is distinct habitats. We'd like to have a few examples of the different habitats, but they all fall under the riparian type. So we don't know if very many of our members have this type of plant on their own property, but please do not go around harvesting plants from parks or reserves. You all know this, you're laughing because you know this. But perhaps you might have a neighbor who will give you permission to pick a few specimens from their property. That would be fine. So we're not sure if many of these plants will have leaves by March 9th. But sometimes the spring branches are interesting with their new leaf buds. So if you are able to bring some specimens to the Sonoma County Fairgrounds on the morning of March 9th, we can use branches, clippings, or other types of samples of native plants. And there's quite a list here, starting out with arroyo willow and going through all kinds of things like horsetail and sea monkey flower, ninebark, bleeding heart, salmonberry. I forgot to put thimbleberry, but that would be a good one too.
Red stem dogwood.
Pardon?
Red stem dogwood.
Yes, red stem dogwood. I actually just put, yes, spice bush. Wonderful
We have a
one.
big list.
Big list, big list. And so you will be able to think of many others as well. We already have sources for oaks in California Bay, and we'll also bring some representation of common invasive plants, and we'll let you know in February if we need additional help with those. Unfortunately, those plants are way too easy for all of us to find in our own yards. There's no trouble finding those. So what we're going to do is request to have those plants dropped off at Sonoma County Fairgrounds between 8:30 and 9:30 a.m. on Saturday, March 9th, and we'll put this in the newsletter too, the February newsletter. And by late February, we will know our exhibit location at the fairgrounds. We'll know which building and where we are in the building. And also, if you want to drop off plants at somebody else's house the previous day, we can figure that out if that's easier for you. So this has my contact information and Virginia's. And do you have anything to add, Virginia?
No, not yet. The science fair is always great fun. We see thousands of students and parents. It's a good way to get the word out. Can you hear me? Okay. Now, with a thank you, Catherine. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three panelists who are going to talk about this very important draft tree ordinance and oak woodland ordinance for Sonoma County. It's something that's been in the works for quite a while. People from CNPS and our speakers, Wendy Krupnik, Cornwall, and Rue Furch have all been involved in it. In fact, they just met with the Board of Supervisors, some of the members today out at Shone Farm. They come with excellent credentials. We're very honored to have them here. Cornwall, I'm just going to do this alphabetically. Caitlin Cornwall has been the programs manager for Sonoma Ecology Center for how many years now?
I've been there.
Since 1998,
I've been there for 26 years.
26
And she's
years.
only 12.
She has a bachelor's of science in biology and a master's in botany. She works with community groups as well as individual groups. She's been on the planning commission. You just finished your stint with them, and is the lead author of several research papers on development here in Sonoma County. I'm not going to go over them all in detail.
Good.
But there's a lot. Rue Furch has been an activist since 1974 here in the county.
I was 12.
And has been involved not only with schools, but all kinds of public and community activities. She's a veteran of the Planning Commission, has run small businesses, has sat on site councils with schools, and was on the Planning Commission for 17 years. She's extraordinarily knowledgeable. She's worked with immigrant groups, all kinds of people. So we've got people with all sorts of background. Wendy Krupnik is a longtime small farmer, organic farmer, still teaches at the JC. And you managed the organic garden at Shone Farms, as I remember.
The small, but back in the small, when it was small, the small
Yeah,
production
in those
garden.
days.
Yeah.
She attended UC Santa Cruz and has been an activist again here in Sonoma County for many years. You'll see her name affiliated with many, many organizations. So she keeps us all in touch with what's going on. You probably are kind of like the hub in the big wheel.
Networker.
Networker, yeah. Like all three of these people are networkers. So without further ado, I would have liked to have done more justice to your backgrounds, but I think everybody wants to hear about these ordinances, their importance. And I'm going to let them sort of do their own moderating because they have a game plan. So, Caitlin, you're going to start.
I have a cough. I apologize. But I've got a glass of water and you're all 6 feet away from me and I'm going to stand up so I can see you. You might be able to see me, but I can't see you. Can you hear me? Okay. Firstly, thank you. Partly for inviting us, but more for the fact that you're interested. This is a huge issue that will last forever. If we get it right, it will be wonderful. And if we don't, we will all be very sorry, as will our grandchildren. So I want to encourage you to stay interested and to be involved. So thank you very much. I stole your logo. I like it. So to begin, I think it's important to notice that the County of Sonoma has on its seal from 1850 a tree. That's got to tell you something. This is where our roots began, and that's how long we've been looking at the value of trees, not always in ways that were particularly protective, but we've always recognized from 1850 that they're really important. So this is a listing to kind of get you a dim idea of how long this process has been going on. I made a little note at the top so that you'll recognize that every time, do you need for me to? I have to move somewhere else. And now he's going to complain about that I'm not in the picture.
You're fine.
Yes, I'm in the picture. Okay. That it takes years to get to the part where it goes to any ordinance goes to the Planning Commission or to the Board of Supervisors. So every single one of these dates was predated by at least a decade of advocacy and advocates trying desperately to get trees protected forever. The Heritage and Landmark Tree Ordinance, it basically is a process, and so it really doesn't protect anything. It was intended to get to that point. A lot of this is groundwork to get to where we are today, which has obviously taken a while since 1986, to be able and ready to adopt an ordinance. So we're ready, but we don't seem to be able. So we need to get the Board of Supervisors to engage with us on that. In '69, there was a tree protection ordinance draft. It took forever, but it was the first one that actually got written. And then in 96, the Valley Oak Habitat combining zone, I don't know if you know what combining zones are, but basically there's a zone that every parcel in Sonoma County is identified by for use. And then when you get a combining zone, you're basically saying it's whatever the base zone is, which could be rural residential, or it could be land intensive agriculture. But if it's combined with another zone, it's a protective layer that describes precisely what is or is not allowed on that land. And that's where you get into the weeds or the roots of the trees, depending. And the riparian corridor ordinance, I'm moving the wrong way again. The riparian corridor ordinance was actually discussed in the last general plan update and provided an opportunity for 1,500 people 3 times to show up and say they didn't want protection for riparian corridors. Mm-hmm. Speaking of riparian corridors, whoever that was, the riparian corridor ordinance, what I was talking to Caitlin about earlier, is the only way to get that passed was to change the language. We had to go from corridor, which basically describes the linear path of a riparian area, and we had to describe it in terms of the functions in order to get it passed, because we had to make sure that people who opposed the corridor notion, which they perceived to be protective of animals and critters and birds and bees and anything that traverse the corridor, to what it actually does in terms of the greater whole of nature. So as you know, corridors, riparian areas, do many, many things. The trees, the bushes, all the things that grow along the riparian area, not only do they provide canopy to keep the stream cooler for fish, but they also, all the things that trees do, which is, climate change adaptation things. They prevent soil from running into the water. They also have, all those little roots are conduits for recharge to the aquifers. They become little flow systems from the tree when it rains down into the aquifer. And that's a really critical issue. And I think it's something that we hope the ordinance will help provide greater recharge opportunities. There's also things like fog drip and stuff like that that happens by virtue of trees. So there are a lot of things that have happened relative to various ways to protect trees, but none of them have ended up where we are today, which is the opportunity to actually pass an ordinance that is protective of trees and forests and oak woodlands. We've never been here before, and it's critically important that every single voice is raised to say, we have to have this and we need it now. We've been at this since 1969. That seems like long enough.
It's my whole lifetime.
You're just 12. That's right, I forgot. So you're not supposed to read this, but I want you to know that part of what happened in the last general plan update was to seed, to lay the groundwork for the tree ordinance and the oak woodland ordinance. So all of these things in the open space district element were language that was inserted with the tree ordinances in mind. Because it's always step by step by step, it's baby steps to get anything into policy. But here we are, so I think we are in vehement agreement that we need all the help we can get to get somewhere. Don't read all these things, but know that people spend a lot of time and energy working to get language in the general plan that would support an ordinance. So there are, the timber production zoning district is one of those combining districts. And so it's a layer that protects on a map zone that has trees. And I was sorry that I couldn't get a copy of that map today, but they haven't got it up on the website. And then there are CEQA requirements, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. And those are intended to examine the impacts of taking trees down or leaving trees in, or whatever the impacts are that need to be mitigated. But there's no requirement to do anything other than mitigate the impact of removal. And that's why it's even more important to have the ordinances state precisely why we need to retain them, specifically what needs to be retained, and how to make sure that that implementation occurs that is mitigating the impact. So it's a little complicated, but if you think about cutting a tree down, what that means, what could you possibly do to mitigate the removal of a full-grown tree? And does replacing it with 2 seedlings count? You know, those sorts of things can't be allowed. So that's the reason we need to be very, very specific about what's required in the ordinance. Here's some other regulations that affect tree removal. There's a lot that goes into the state agencies and federal agencies that are requirements for tree of, you know, any kind of activity with trees, I guess is what would be the right thing to say. But they are not very restrictive, and they are certainly not protective, because they are fundamentally designed to permit tree removal. They organize around how to remove trees, but it's how to remove trees. So what we're looking to do is try and find ordinance language that will say how to protect trees, how to make sure that we retain not just individual trees, but forests and woodland areas. So you don't have to know that part, but I just want you to know how long it's been going on, because I'm responsible for history, and you need to know this has been going on for a really, really long time, and many, many people like you have been dedicated to making sure that our landscapes look like they do in 20 years. It's not just how they look, although people keep talking about how pretty it is. It is pretty. It is also exceedingly functional. And those functions are what we have to protect. And I encourage you to use that word because it describes the entire ecosystem. I just thought I should throw that in because, I mean, it's old and it's probably not even accurate as applied in California or in Sonoma County. But just think what that means for one tree, that we could look at one tree and pretend like it's just pretty. It actually has value. And it's not just pretty value, it's economic value, it's function value. It's all of the things that we know are really critically important to the future of the planet. So the next speaker, I tried to find a yellow mustache, but I couldn't find one. The next speaker is Caitlin, who she's more recently on the Planning Commission than I am, and she knows a great deal about where we stand now, and she's going to be talking about what the tree ordinance and the oak woodland ordinance say today, and probably encouraging you maybe even more vehemently than I have, although I'll certainly join her voice in participating. This never happens alone. And part of the reason that I wanted you to see the history is to know generations of people. This harkens back to Bill Cordham. Generations of people have laid the groundwork to pass these ordinances, and to get it over the threshold, we need all your voices to participate. So Caitlin, she may not need to see you.
Hi, everybody. Before I start, I just wanted to say something really brief that not all of you will be interested in, but for those of you who know Bob Ross, he's in very poor health. And if anybody who knows him, he worked with Milo Baker and the state CNPS for years and years, a wonderful person. If you want to contact him, I have his email address, so come see me after. Yeah, a couple comments about how,
Sorry, it seems like the mic may have. Can you guys hear it okay out there?
I think it was on mute.
Oh, there we go. All right.
It helped that I stood up.
So where we are right now with these ordinances, as Rue said, it's a really perfect moment. And there's a few reasons why it's a perfect moment to pass ordinances that are much more protective than any we've had in the past. One of the things that's going on is that we are sort of culturally still responding to and learning from the wildfires. And so there's been a little bit of a sifting out, I think, about forest management, because before the wildfires, I think when people heard the phrase forest management, it was just foresters who used that phrase pretty much, like people who were trying to cut trees to earn money, and the professionals who help them. But since the fires, a lot of people have cut a lot of trees for not those reasons. And there was a lot of over response, a lot of cutting that was excessive, live trees and dead trees, some cutting that was needed. And so I think we've just been sort of culturally just sort of oscillating. And now it's still complicated. I think now, and the reason I think that this ordinance in one way is hard is that it's trying to chart this middle ground. We do have people still cutting way too much out there. And we also have places that need more active stewardship than they're getting now. So there are still people who actually need to be encouraged to cut more than they are now, which is usually zero. And the two most obvious examples for the kinds of places that people need to cut more are treed areas that are invaded by plants like brooms or invasive blackberry or any one of a number of villains that we like to villainize, eucalyptus. Yeah. There are riparian areas that are invaded by acacia or tree of heaven. So, those are places that really require a lot of pretty aggressive management if we want those places to thrive and produce the functions that Rue was talking about, biodiversity, water capture, carbon sequestration, fire resilience, beauty, all those things, wildlife habitat. So that's one whole area where there's not enough active land management. And then the other arena is where there legitimately are overcrowded forests, often because they're places where there's been no fire for a very long time. And we have a lot of treed ecosystems here that in the absence of fire will become overcrowded. Doug firs will invade oak forests, for example, or bays or live oaks will just proliferate to the point that nothing else can grow, and they're not very healthy themselves either. So that's a more subtle situation. It takes discernment. Not all landowners have discernment. Not all landowners have information. There's a lot of us who are working really hard to get that information out to people, doing through workshops and websites and beautiful written things over there. So anyway, the way I like to think about this is that there are no-touch people, and then there are bad touch people, and then somewhere in the middle, there's the Goldilocks touch. And I want to just be sure to say this to you all, because I think people who love native plants can sometimes have a tendency to be no-touch people. But if you hark back to the history of indigenous life here over the millennia, what appears to have created the greatest biodiversity and beauty was a really active relationship with the land. And it's very satisfying to be in active participation with the land producing everything that it can. I just keep that in mind, that we're after the Goldilocks touch. not the no touch, not the bad touch. So anyway, so I think that's timely that like culturally we might be at this moment where we can kind of see that we're trying to walk this line. Another thing that's really timely is that we're in a grape glut globally. And so there's not a great demand right now for the vineyard industry to build new vineyards. They are not champing at the bit to cut down massive areas of forest, like as much as they have in the past. They're still doing it, but the pieces are smaller. Mm-hmm. So this is a really good time. We apparently have not experienced a huge agricultural backlash to this proposed set of ordinances, which is amazing because we've seen it be different. Another thing that's important now is to think about the fact that these rules have to be written in a way that they will work even if they're not particularly enforced. Our county basically fails on enforcement. I don't know if you knew this. It's probably common, I don't know, in most large counties, but the only way really that the county's rules get enforced are if someone goes into the county asking for a permit, then they will be held to, what's on the list. Or if someone persistent, maybe aggressively persistent, makes a complaint and keeps on making the complaint, preferably goes to the newspaper. I mean, it's just what they say is enforcement is complaint driven, which means it's very random. And so we can't write policy that takes really active surveillance and enforcement because it won't happen. So that sometimes affects what will work. Mm-hmm. What else? I guess another thing I want to say is that, as Rue was saying, these two ordinances have taken years to get to where we are now, and part of the impetus, especially I would say for the Oak Woodland ordinance, was to prevent conversions of oak woodlands into vineyards. And it's just taken like this ridiculous time lag to get to this point. So even though that push is slower than it used to be, that kind of conversion is not as frenetic as it has been in the past. It easily could be again. So
especially in the coast.
Especially the coast.
Yeah, coastal areas.
Well, not in the coastal zone, but yeah.
And it's interesting, I've been told that we shouldn't really talk a lot about the fact that one of the main purposes of these ordinances is to prevent conversion. And the reason not to talk about it a whole lot is that it could rattle the cage of the viticultural industry. So I don't really know if that's true. I'm putting it out there to you because I'm going to ask you now, we're going to ask you 17 times to please say something to the Board of Supervisors. Their email is super simple. It's just BOS for Board of Supervisors at sonoma-county.org. So when you say something, and I'll just say this and we'll say it, like I say, 17 more times, but
I won't count.
You don't have to talk about how you don't want to see more oak woodlands converted to vineyards, even if you do. But the thing to talk about is how important these forest and woodland ecosystems are to you. Why do you care about them? You can be very personal about it. You don't have to be technical about it. They need to hear from you sort of as constituents. And of course, say that you're part of the Milo Baker chapter, that's fine, but you don't have to be a biologist or sound like a biologist. These two ordinances can be separated. There is much less opposition for some reason to the Oak Woodland ordinance, which I don't understand because it's actually the more protective, but that's okay. We'll go with it. So what they should do is separate the two and not force them to be on the same timeline. So when you talk to them, when you email them, just tell them that you want them to pass the Oak Woodland ordinance now, as it is, first, in a hurry, get on with it. That there's not, that it's urgent. And then
Calendar, the other one.
And put the other one, the tree protection ordinance, on the calendar. Make a date for it. Right now, there is no date. And ideally, you send this little message before January 23rd, which is next Tuesday?
Week
From today. Because on that date, on the 23rd, they are having a meeting where they're setting their calendar, the major events of their calendar for the next year. And so we'd like both of these things to be on their calendar as major things that have a date that they will get on with. And I think we'll come back to some of the little details. There's a small group of us that are there was this field trip this morning that the staff at the county organized. It was maybe 25 people. The people who've been talking the most about these ordinances, a bunch of foresters, a bunch of conservation people, and a bunch of county people. And the foresters generally think that the tree protection ordinance is kind of too much of the nanny state, that it doesn't allow private landowners to just get on with whatever they think should be done. So there's some ideas that we have about how to potentially tweak the tree protection ordinance without basically giving anything away. The tree protection ordinance as it is right now is okay. It's okay. It's so much better than anything we've had. So that's another thing you can say. I like it, pass it, approve it. I live here. I care about these ecosystems. Don't water it down anymore. And then some of us wonkier types will end up talking more to staff about tweaks that we can live with. So I think I should pass it on to Wendy now to talk about the agricultural perspective.
Yeah, and just for a little further clarification, we've had a tree protection ordinance for a while. Agriculture has been exempted. It's been pretty weak. So what's been happening for the last 2 years is an update to that tree protection ordinance, and then a new one, which is largely thanks to Milo Baker Chapter and some really great work that our conservation committee has done, to add a new oak woodland ordinance that isn't about protecting just individual trees, but entire oak woodlands. So it's a very different approach to tree protection than the tree protection ordinance, which is tree by tree. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because I wasn't sure what it was. And both have enormous lists of exemptions. I've got this short list here, but it, exempted our defensible space, exempted our vegetation management plans, exempted our trees that are dying and hazardous. Again, the list goes on and on. So we feel that there's already, there's already plenty of opportunities for the stuff that many people agree needs to be done to reduce trees, but that it does offer much stronger protections than we've had. So yeah, from the beginning introduction, I do wear very many hats. In this context, my hat is as acting president of the local chapter of Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And CAF is a statewide organization that is the voice of ecological agriculture in California, has been around for over 45 years. We do have active chapters throughout the state, but I think that this region has the oldest and most active chapter, which is kind of Sonoma County. We tend to be engaged in a lot of stuff. So I've been really privileged to work closely with our local chapter for 24 years now. We have lobbied long and hard for removal of the agricultural exemption, because I would say that the largest and most egregious tree removals, especially of oak woodlands, have been for vineyards, have been for agriculture. Some has been for development, housing developments and other things, but the vast majority have been for vineyards. And as was mentioned, this is a good time, and today somebody's saying, well, how many acres have been converted in the last 10 years? Not that many. Yeah, the wine industry has been, has taken a hit. And there's a glut of grapes, and there isn't a whole lot of push. The push that is the incredibly wealthy people who want to put in their little vanity vineyards. And they can pay the mitigation fees, they can pay whatever it is, it's just they've got tons of money, and they want their little vanity vineyards. And somehow these ordinances need to be able to protect trees from folks like that, where money is no object, and they just want their vanity vineyards, or whatever it is that they want to put in. And they, often they're people who aren't from here, they don't understand what we see as the value of trees and the value of these functions. So, again, CAF has lobbied long and hard. We've been kind of, I think one of the only agricultural voices to both remove the agricultural exemption and to support the oak woodland ordinance. And it's because we see that, especially with climate change happening, the value of trees in agriculture is it's as high as it is for everybody else. When there are intense heat waves, the trees provide shade. Anytime it's a warm day, if you drive out, West County, South County, where are the cows huddled? In the shade of the trees. There's been increasing research done with this what's called agrivoltaics, solar panels on farms. And I think they found last year in the Midwest, where there were all those horribly hot days, when there's crops getting a little bit of shade from solar panels, they do so much better. Well, the same is true with trees. There is, one of the things we've included in our comment letters several times is there is significant federal, state, and local funding to farmers to plant trees on their farms. So for us to be allowing them to be cut down on farms and have a big exemption from that at the same time that our tax dollars are paying for people to plant trees is a little ludicrous. So we've made these arguments, and I don't know how far they've gone, but the fact that there hasn't been the industry pushing against these, at least I think that that's helped somewhat. Let's see, what else do I want to say about them? I don't really have a whole lot else, to say from my standpoint, but again, I think that the other hat that I've worn is my networking hat, and it's really important to me as a member of Milo Baker Chapter of Native Plant Society to bring native plant concerns into some of these other circles. So I think that's about all I had.
Yeah.
Can you read? We have more to say as a panel, but that was just my part.
The history and all has been great, but could you tell us where the county is with the two ordinances?
That's exactly where we're going.
What has happened the last few months?
It has my name.
We can.
Yeah. So I think that I tried to explain a little bit of that before. There's a moratorium right now, and it expires shortly. The county has put it on the calendar to re-up the moratorium. If they do that, it will prevent any new applications from being permitted until May 31st.
However, there are no applications for any tree cutting in oak woodlands anyway. So it's not going to help.
It's not I'm supposed to say where we are. This is where we are. Where we are is this moratorium, which is a token, because as she says, there's no one's applying to cut down trees at this point in the pouring rain. However, they are extending it, and the goal at this point is for us is to get them to calendar and pass the Oak Woodland Ordinance immediately. And that we need your support to request for next Tuesday's Board of Supervisors meeting when they determine their year-long calendar. Then what happens is tentatively March 6th, the tree ordinance and the Oak Woodland Ordinance will come back to the Board of Supervisors for additional discussion. So we are in the bridge time where it's really important to have input into both of these ordinances to staff. And that would be Robert Rayo. And we can leave his email address for you if you want it, or we'll give it to you and then you can circulate it. But basically, you don't have time to read the ordinance, or you don't want it to, it's only 11 pages, it's not too bad. You don't have time to do that. Just ask them to calendar it and pass it, because we're in that dwell time where letters like the one that Milo Baker submitted are really important because you drive home the issue. I didn't mention, and I should have, I think, that we are in a sort of a blessed phase between industry objections to the tree ordinance and a time when it was extremely difficult. We had, I don't know if any of you know about the vineyard erosion ordinance, VESCO. And there have been several iterations of VESCO, which is basically supposed to protect erosion, soil erosion off vineyards. There's another one happening right now at the North Coast Water Quality Control Board to protect against vineyard erosions. But the county, during the time when it was passing, I think I've served on 2 VESCO ordinance functions where we wrote VESCO, and the pushback from the wine industry was massive. They didn't want any regulations. They wanted, they're good stewards of land. So there. But what was interesting was the environmental community really wanted to put a tree ordinance in VESCO because trees stabilize soil. But we couldn't get there from here because of the objections of the wine industry and the grape growers. There are 2 winemakers and grape growers, and they both hated it. So I don't think we can assume that we will not see objections. I think we have to assume that there will be people who criticize lasting protection of trees because it interferes with property rights. Simply put, that's what it interferes with. But the functions that we talked about earlier are the parts that belong to all of us. It's part of the public trust. And that's a legal requirement, is that the county legally protect the public trust resources. And trees are part of that public trust because of the various functions that they perform. So I hope that gives you sort of the immediate timeline. It gets you all the way to March 6th. And you want to add to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just on that topic of where these ordinances are right now. So VESCO has happened. It keeps getting improved. So now you can't just willy-nilly cut down trees to build a vineyard.
But you can just nilly, you just can't
that's
willy.
where I was getting there.
Okay.
You can't just willy-nilly do it to install a vineyard. Because of the California Environmental Quality Act, you can't just willy-nilly cut down a ton of trees to build a building. But if you just want to cut down a bunch of trees for no particular reason, in Sonoma County right now, you can.
Because there's no permit process.
Yeah, so that's what these ordinances are needed for.
City of San Rosa's.
Yeah, the county, which is almost 1 million acres minus the little areas of the cities. It's massive. So anyway, I just wanted to.
Yeah,
put that little point in.
I think, yeah, that's a really good point, is that, so what happened was that this came to the Board of Supervisors in November, and, we thought that it was very, very widely supported, but Supervisor Gore and some of the foresters were like, wait, even though there had been extensive stakeholder outreach prior, including the foresters. And it seemed like they hadn't read the ordinance because everything they complained about were already listed as exemptions. But there were a few things that did seem to be missing. So it came back to the Board of Supervisors in December. The same thing happened again, but this time really everything was covered. But so there was this kind of big argument on December 12th. And what the supervisors decided to do was, okay, we'll just have a moratorium and we're going to go back and get into the details because clearly this is very contentious. The problem is nobody knows about the moratorium. And at part of the field trip today, somebody who works for UC said, I know of somebody who just cut down a bunch of oak trees because they didn't know about the moratorium and there is no need to go get a permit.
Right.
So it doesn't matter that permits have been suspended because there hasn't historically been a need for a permit. If this was ag zone land and this person doesn't want to put in a vineyard, they want to put in agave. That's the latest thing, because it's not going to use water. It's going to be for tequila, right? So that's one of the latest things that people are into. So, you know, again, it's so problematic when we don't have a really good mechanism for informing people about what the existing regulations are. And then when they change, like all of a sudden, there's a moratorium that was established with no advance notice. Who's going to know the next day, you know, that they shouldn't cut down the tree? When there was, you know, then there was nothing historical. So there's a lot of problematic nuances, many, with all of these discussions. But yeah, we really do need massive public outcry. And I would say in particular to the 4th District, Supervisor Boris District, because I think that he, and the 5th District, Linda Hopkins District, because those were the supervisors who were on our field trip today, who were most engaged and who raised the red flags that are pushing this process far, you know, it really should have been approved in December.
Yeah.
At that point.
And if you look at the maps, if you look at the maps of where the overlay zones are for timber zones and RRD and the areas where LiDAR shows trees, they're in the 4th and 5th district primarily.
And
so primarily.
Yeah.
We didn't have Susan today, so it doesn't count. I know you were there. So anyway, there are maps that show LiDAR maps, which are really cool because they actually show you what kind of plant, but there are also maps that are just the green indicators for where forests are and where overlay zones are. And if you check the county's website, you can see how much of Sonoma County is covered with this beautiful functioning forest. That, I mean, it's part of it's just beautiful, but part of it changes the way our lives are because of all the functions that clusters of trees or individual trees provide to us. I think you're supposed to deal with takeaways from today, which you started.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a lot more to add about takeaways from today, so you guys might have more to say on this, but my takeaways were that I think there is a middle path that can be found between what the forest, the sort of landowner initiative that the foresters are really committed to. It's interesting. I think the foresters, it's not just that they want landowners to, you know, cut trees and sell them. It's also sort of political or partisan. There's a little bit of like a libertarian
Property
thing,
rights.
property rights. Like people should be able to do whatever they damn please, and they should hire me to tell them how to do whatever they damn please. So there is a little bit of a culture clash, and that's why this field trip was organized. Basically, was to try to get people from different parts of that culture spectrum to stand in the same woods at the same time together and see what they saw. You know, like, what do you see when you look at those trees? Well, what do I see when I look at those trees? So one of the things that I think the very latest, and maybe this is too in the weeds for y'all, but you know, it seems to me like a really good thing that people, private landowners who have forest or woodland should not go cutting a bunch of stuff without having somebody's eyeballs on it. Somebody who knows something about forests or woodlands should have a conversation, should make some kind of recommendation. There was a lot of talk today about, well, maybe people shouldn't be able to cut anything unless they have a forest management plan, capital F, capital M, capital P. You can't really get a thing like that without working with a registered professional forester, capital R, capital P, capital F. And there are like 6 of them in the county, and you can't get them.
And it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, they're expensive. They're busy. They're never going to prioritize like some 20-acre lot, you know. So there needs to be, but there needs to be some other kind of way of a person getting consultation from some kind of professional or knowledgeable person, but it doesn't need to be an RPF. It shouldn't have to be an RPF. That's not really workable. So that was one of the takeaways. Maybe we can broaden that language so that natural resource nonprofits, for example, resource conservation districts, can also be the entity that sort of blesses some landowner plan. It could be an informal one, for example. And then there was a lot of argument today about, do people need to pay a lot of money and mitigate for the loss of trees that are down as small as 6 inches in diameter? And there was we did a lot of arguing about that, but I think in the end, you know, the exact size of a little shrimpy tree that is taken is not really, that's not what's important about that tree. There's more of context that you need to know before you can say whether that 6-inch tree should stay or go. Like if it's kind of if the only thing around is little 6-inch trees, you need to keep some of those 6-inch trees because later you will have no trees if you take them out. But if you're in an overcrowded forest, then yeah, probably almost all the 6-inch trees should come out, because if they stay, then the 20-inch trees will never grow to their potential because they're overcrowded. So there's some more kind of the techno wonk pieces of the ordinance, I think, that could use some tweaking, but we don't want to give up, and this is where you all come in, do not want to give up the ability of these ordinances to maximally protect biodiversity, water capture, carbon sequestration, beauty, soil stabilization, climate resilience, all those things that we need from all those functions that those ecosystems provide.
Yeah. So along those lines, I was really quickly scanning through because the board did post their draft calendar of significant agenda items for this year. And I noticed that on June 10th, a habitat conservation plan for the county is on the agenda. So this is an even bigger picture layer. And I think that this is definitely on, you know, the CNPS radar. And I remembered learning about this, reading in something from CNPS statewide, that they have apparently a really good one in San Diego County. And so pointing to models is something that the county really appreciates. Like if this is something, tell us, you know, a good example, you know, they can borrow the language, it saves the word. But I also had read someplace, and I don't remember the specifics, about how a habitat conservation plan can be more in name and actually detrimental. So as always, the devil's in the details. But this is something that I would suggest that we all pay attention to. And again, we'll need to have input, and it will probably take a really long time. But the big picture of really conserving habitat function in the county needs to be something way beyond what these two ordinances will be able to do. So, you know, looking forward, I think that's where we need to go.
And when there were a number of things that were takeaways today, one of which is that the county is pretty dysfunctional. And that means that people with level heads have to engage. And so this is this is the 17th plate. Are we getting there? And one of the things that I think is really critically important that is often not mentioned, Caitlin mentioning the 6-inch trees reminded me, it's all very well and good to protect these grand, old, beautiful trees, but it's like saving all the old people. We have to take care of the grandchildren. We have to take care of the saplings. We have to make sure that there is a place for the next generation of trees. So the language has to be there to protect a forest ecosystem, a system, not just a tree, but a system. And that system is what creates the whole, the greater whole that provides all the functions. You can't have a single tree and have it provide all those functions. It has to have the generations in order to a tree community. We now don't have forests, we have tree communities. So I really encourage you to think about generational growth of trees as well as the grand old beautiful elders, if you will.
Yeah, I think we have, I don't know where we're at. on
Oh, we're
time.
at next steps.
Well, I think
So
that's our
next
17.
steps are 17, for God's sakes, be involved. That's,
The tree ordinance, do you feel like it?
she wants you to speak into the microphone. I remember.
You feel like the tree ordinance actually does protect those next generation trees?
No.
She asks, well, is that all right? I don't have to repeat her question? Okay, if she, okay. I had instructions, I'm trying to follow instructions. I think the tree ordinance makes an attempt to do that, but the language is so non-specific that it's just about not enforceable. So even if, one of the questions I asked today to the supervisors and staff was, so somebody cuts down a tree, seemed like a good thing for them to do at the time for whatever reason. Say it was gonna fall on their house, or say it was gonna fall on some other tree, or say their kid's rope swing broke, who knows? And their neighbor complains. As Caitlin said, the only system we have for managing is complaint driven. And then you get to the part where code enforcement theoretically goes out and says, your neighbor says that you cut down a tree. And the person who cut down the tree can say, but my kid's rope swing was gonna break. How is enforcement supposed to deal with that? Do we have demonstration that the rope swing was in any way dangerous? Do we know that the tree was in a position where it was going to fall over on a house? Do we know that it was going to fall over across the road? We don't know any of that stuff. So enforcement, unless the language, this is getting back to your question, unless the language is quite specific about what we're protecting, not only can we not we cannot be certain that in time, especially because we have tremendous turnover of staff, so their memory and the Board of Supervisors may not be all-knowing. They may not even have been here when the ordinance was drafted. So intent has to be language specific. Let me say that again. Intent has to be language specific. You can't say it would be nice if. You have to say thou shalt. And so anytime you say something about protections or preservation or restoration, you have to be quite specific about what that means and what it looks like, so that the county at some point, either through code enforcement or through a lawsuit, if it comes to that, can say, no, we met the criteria of the ordinance. Does that almost answer your question? Yeah.
We're talking about the tree ordinance specifically, not the oak ordinance.
Well, but it's true to both. The language has to be specific or it can't be enforced.
But the oak woodland ordinance,
does protect young trees. One of the things that came up today that I found frustrating was, when we were talking about this issue of regenerating, is like, yeah, we need to be replanting. Like, and I did bring up the point, but it was much later, that nursery grown seedlings will never be, maybe some are unlikely, let's put it that way, to be as strong and vigorous as naturally regenerating, especially oaks. When they get their roots established in the ground from the get-go, as opposed to something that's been in a container. And also the genetics, are they going to be the local genetics and all of that? So, I heard some of the foresters say, yeah, we need a lot more nurseries to grow all these, for planting. That's how we take care of the next generation. I don't think that's,
No.
the complete solution
No.
by any means.
I want to say it needs to be recognized, I think, that county planning staff, we're beating up on them pretty hard because we don't have what we want, which is done. But they have made some really good choices in terms of language, and they have made accommodations to things that we've requested. For example, originally, the tree ordinances protected the drip line of a tree, which is cool. I mean, it beats being able to cut things right up to the trunk. But because there were enough voices raised.
That was specifically Milo Baker that screamed and said, no, it needs to be more than the drip line.
Well, it wasn't only Milo Baker, but basically we got 150%, which means you start to get into the protection of the roots, the root system. And there's some specific language about what you can and cannot do within that perimeter. And so now the language is strike through when it says drip line and says 150 feet, the perimeter. And so we get successes. We just have to be perseverant. And so I'm hoping you'll do that. But there are some good things in it. And those, I think, are part of why we're encouraging you all to be engaged and to support the good things that are protective and lasting. Because if we don't pass these things, you saw the history. You know how much longer it will go on? Question all the way in the back.
Thank you. I had a question about what are the actual names of these two ordinances so we can reference it correctly in our emails to the Board of Supervisors. It seems like there's two different ordinances. You could just repeat their names,
Yeah.
please.
The Oak Woodland Ordinance.
Woodland protection. Woodland protection. Are you sure?
Yeah, yeah. Here's the tree protection ordinance, if anybody's
Tree
desperate for
protection
some
ordinance.
light reading. And then there's the second one, which is the,
Oh, I do have it. That's still the tree.
that's the, oh, that's the one he gave me. Okay. It's, the other one is the Oak Woodland Protection
Are you
Ordinance.
sure it has a P? I thought it was OWO. You might be right.
Trish was abbreviating in OWO, and I think Trish is always right, right?
Oh, Trish is always right. So if that's what she says, that's true.
She was abbreviating OWO and TPO.
Yep, right.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, Oak Woodland Ordinance is one of them, and Tree Protection Ordinance is the other. And I don't really honestly know why there are two, and I'm not sure if it matters, it just, that's the way it is now. But Oak Woodland really has the more rational approach because it protects the whole community of trees. It's sort of going for the growth idea, but very cleverly, the way the staff has written it, even a single tree can qualify, which I think is very clever of them.
Mhm.
So I hope that helps.
Can you also repeat the email?
Yeah, so there's two emails I would tell you about. The Board of Supervisors, and this of course just goes to their staff and then it is distributed to them. BOS@sonoma-county.org. And if your email is sort of at a higher level and just sort of your general, making the general points that we've been making, I think that's sufficient. If you're a wonky person like myself and you have actual sort of suggestions for language or whatever, you might want to also include the lead staff person in your email.
Yeah.
And that's Robert Aguero, and his email is Robert dot, and I'll spell his last name, Aguero. And then the last part of his email is the same as the supervisors, sonoma-county.org.
Article 67, Oak Woodland Combining District and Valley Oak Habitat Combining District. That's what,
That's,
I don't think you
that's
have to go
different
there.
though.
You don't have to go there.
That's not the whole ordinance, that's part of it.
Just
yes.
go with OWO.
Oh,
Everybody can remember that.
Oak Woodland Ordinance will, they'll know what you're talking about.
Because
Yes,
they're,
ma'am.
yeah.
So I have a request of our chapter here, that somebody take on this responsibility over the next 24 hours, let's say, and write down these names, these email addresses, the specific name of each ordinance, and a little bit of
a few bullet points of wording that would be helpful for us as we get in communication with the supervisors. Make it as easy as possible for everybody in this room to send something in. Somebody going to
Who's
do
the
that?
point of contact on your end for that?
Is it for-
I send emails, but so somebody else can write this up, and email it to me. I'm a membership person, if you look at the website, you'll find my email address and Susan Dean is something membership.
Yeah. I think we can supply email addresses to Virginia. Is that where they should go? And then
Well, no, you
she'll,
can go to
Probably
Susan
to
Dean,
Susan.
and then Susan, yeah, I can
Okay.
help, I can help,
okay,
I
okay.
can help
All right.
triangulate that.
We have like 650 members, so it's a lot of them.
So what we need is the most important, I think we have the vehicle to get it out. What we need is the write-up that says, this is who you're going to write to. These are the supervisors' names. These are some bullet points of what you could potentially say. And this is the deadline under which you need to send these things to them. If somebody here could put that together and synthesize that in the next, well, you said the 23rd of this month, so in the next 24 hours, let's say, and then whoever's in charge of the distribution.
I do distribution, but I'm not writing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We can
Go
grab
on our
something, run it by
website.
Trish,
Yeah.
and it's just, I can tell you where it'll
We
be.
need a push.
Okay, and I've got a question from the Zoom here.
Oh, good.
In your political experience, are there any policy carrots in addition to this well thought out stick that would help landowners prioritize shrub/conifer removal in oak stands as a result of fire suppression as a future action by the county, or is that best dealt with through other actions?
I can talk to that a little bit. So the question is about carrots and not sticks. How do we get people to want to do the good things or help them do the good things instead of only, well, want to do both, help people do the good things and dissuade them from doing the bad things. So there's a ton being done now to assist all kinds of landowners, private and public. I'll start with the county. The county has a whole really very, very large program that has just relatively recently started to get off the ground. They're doing free assessments of people's property. They have brought in millions and millions of dollars from FEMA and other big funders. They are prioritizing their first priorities for like getting out there on the land sort of post fire is all about sort of safety stuff. So that's probably of less interest to those of us in this room. It's a lot of ridge lines and roadsides, very fire oriented, but they're going to be following that up with work that is more landscape oriented, more wildland health oriented. And they're actually doing some decent planning, which is nice and refreshing. And then there's just a ton of public money that's being spent through various grant programs that's being put out there by nonprofits, resource conservation districts, homeowners associations, fire safe councils, restoration
UC extension
nonprofits,
programs.
UC extension programs, educating landowners and also giving them financial incentives or technical assistance to do the work. And I will say a lot of this work is excessively focused on fire and fire prevention and fire reduction and fire severity, etc. And sometimes if that's your only focus, you're going to be doing some damage ecologically. So the key thing, and this is something that the Ecology Center works on very hard. I would encourage you to pick up my little impact report that I have over there about what all we do, but really trying to get people to understand that they can pursue multiple values on their land. You don't have to pick being safer from fire over wildlife habitat or beauty or water capture. You can have it all, but you do need to educate yourself and be informed and go carefully and get input and go gradually. And you have to sort of embrace the complexity and enjoy it and understand that your stewardship of that land is forever. And if you don't like that, you probably shouldn't live there. So anyway, there's a ton going on, and I'd be happy to talk at great length about more of those details to anybody.
I just want to address the carrot question. Milo Baker, with your 250 person outreach,
600.
whatever, your massive reach,
Non-members who just want to get stuff.
grow your outreach. But getting to the carrot, I think that the key to the carrot is understanding.
Yeah, the information.
And Milo Baker is in one of those unique sort of neutral positions to say, you've got something really special there. This is what it does for you. Why in the world would you want to do anything but keep it healthy? And explain the functions that each tree or a grove of trees provides to a landowner, because they have to find that it's their personal carrot in order to care enough to do something about it. Are you watching me? Not sure what. So if you can make it their carrot, that landowner's carrot that says, this tree is valuable to me. Look at all the things it performs that makes my world better, makes my property worth more. That's something that people sort of forget, is the value of a tree. So it's not just economic value, it's all the functions. But by virtue of understanding exactly what that tree or trees mean to you, that's why people retain their trees. That's why people take care of their shrubs and their bushes and do their Japanese maples and whatever else, is because it means something to them, or they hang the kids' swing from it. It has significance to individuals who own those trees, and so they have to understand the value of that tree. Then the carrot is easy.
Just briefly, Caitlin said something about the county was helping with fuels management, what agencies are the county? Caitlin mentioned something about the county management, what agency?
It's in Permanent Sonoma. There's the emergency management division, and there's also the natural resources division. So if you look up Sonoma County Wildfire Adapted, that's a good way in. And some of that work they have funded and it's going on now. Some of it will be rolling out over the next 5 or 10 years.
She wants to say something.
Yeah, there's also the resource conservation districts. There's also those community fire safe councils, which I don't know how many of them there are. There's a bunch of them in a number of communities, mostly in kind of the high fire zone areas, I think, where they are. I'll let you add more to that. But I also just wanted to put a plug in because next week, I don't remember the date, but Wendy Smith might know this. Sonoma Land Trust is hosting Mimi Enright on resilient landscapes. There's going to be a presentation. So there's just a lot of free information that's offered out there that's helpful to landowners in making some of these decisions. And then, you know, I was actually someplace else, I can't remember where it was. I hadn't seen this from CNPS on the fire recovery guide, which has got a lot of great information.
And it's free.
And it's free, you can get a copy.
CNPS website.
That's very helpful to landowners on what they can do. And it's broken down, you know, by the different parts of the state and all that. So, you know, it's not overly general. It's really good.
Yeah, that program that Mimi Enright is giving, that is about defensible space. So it's sort of how to have it all in your defensible space. and the Ecology Center is one of the members of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition that produced that curriculum, and that's been very well received through like workshops in various neighborhoods. We're now working on with several other organizations producing a website that is going to be called Tending the Land for Fire Resilience in Sonoma County. And it's meant to be about the land, you know, beyond defensible space. And there's just such an overwhelming amount of information and expertise in Sonoma County on how to do that, how to be a good land steward. Now that fire is with us, that this project is trying to condense it and serve it up and organize it for landowners. And it actually, it's not just landowners, you know, there's actually a lot of renters out there who really care about where they live and who are actually doing some of the work, sometimes in exchange for rent. And then, you know, people who don't own land also benefit or are harmed by the quality of the care of the land around them. So it's not just landowners. I always fall into that trap. So anyway, you can look for that. We're just going to launch that website in the next, I would say 3 months. So Tending the Land for Fire Resilience in Sonoma County, to try to sort of reduce the overwhelm and give people just a place to start. But really the way people learn this stuff the best is socially, in a workshop, walking around someplace with other people who are struggling with some of the same dilemmas. And that's by far that's also the way that you can get money to help do the work, is socially. Generally, a single landowner can't get money, public money, help to do these projects, but together they can. So these fire safe councils and COPE groups and various emergency preparedness groups, they tend to start being very fear-based, and they tend to start by wanting to cut down a whole ton of trees somewhere because they're afraid of what happened in 2017. But when, in our experience, when we talk to them and say, well, don't you care about wildlife habitat? Don't you care about the climate? Don't you care about the beauty of your property? Don't you care about reducing your maintenance long-term? They say yes, 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 and yes. And that becomes a much more interesting conversation. So I would urge you, if you have connections with any of those groups or people who live in those groups, don't accept it on face value that just because it's called a fire safe council, that's all they care about. Because we're all humans and we all live someplace that we're attached to. We're not just attached to being safe there, we're attached to it being beautiful and productive and full of wildlife. So I think that's another thing that CNPS is really well positioned to do. Like Rue was saying, the Milo Baker chapter, CNPS is very friendly. It's very like, you know, we're all just like people, and you're all great little messengers of this more multi-objective approach to the land. A lot of people are still really myopically fear-based and thinking about fire, but there's so much more, and they're not in conflict, but it takes knowledge to understand how to tend the land in a way that accomplishes all the objectives, all the functions.
I'm trying to train them to use that word. There's a story there, but it's an important word.
I don't know how long we should go on. I'm sure
It's almost 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it is almost 9 o'clock.
Don't you want to go home for a nap
I
yet?
got a comment. Yeah. In keeping with all the things you talked about in public education, our next February 20th meeting will be a presentation by Jose Esparza, who's the project manager for the CNPS and multiple organization Young Oak Inventory here in California. And it's a citizen science program. It's very exciting. And he'll be talking about that and just, you know, another way to help. And after March, we'll have the director of the California Oaks Foundation to reinforce everything.
Have him write you a letter.
I'm sorry.
I said, have him write you a letter.
Yes.
If he knows about the oaks, be the Lorax.
Well, the woman from the California Oaks Foundation did write it.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I just thank you for the presentation. So I just wanted to maybe get the 18th time. So the meeting is on Tuesday for the board of supervisors, right? Okay, and I just want to be clear. So it's not so important for us to like encourage this continued emergency moratorium that I've seen posted about.
It'd be better if they passed the ordinances.
Okay,
The moratorium needs to be in place until the ordinances are approved.
okay, so because I saw the word emergency moratorium, that's the one that's gonna continue the current moratorium.
If they
That's
pass
good.
it, it will then extend, moratoriums are legally required for 45 days, I think it is. There's a legal requirement
Sure.
for a certain number of days. And so if they expire, in order to continue the moratorium, it takes a vote in order to extend the moratorium. So we want them to extend the moratorium, but only for the length of time it takes for them to pass the wretched things.
Got it, okay, and we want them to get that on the calendar.
We want them to calendar the vote to approve the Oak Woodland Ordinance, OWO, and we want them to calendar the vote for the tree ordinance. And we want for them to vote to approve both of them. And we want them to do it before the moratorium expires.
Okay, I think I got that.
And we'll send an email about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, what about attending that meeting? Is that important to have people attend?
If faces have a lot more impact than an email because they get gajillions of emails. But
If you send the email, then they might have a little conversation with someone before the meeting, which could be helpful. I mean, both is best.
Okay.
yeah, when
And
you
just as-
can,
as-
show up.
As an FYI, they're continuing their policy of you can't make comments electronically during a meeting now. So if you want to make comments during a meeting, you have to show up in person.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's an advance, notification.
If you send your emails the Friday before the hearing, if you send the email the Friday before the hearing, they're more likely to see it. Because if you think about the gajillions of constituents every supervisor has and the bajillions of emails they likely get, the longer they have to at least see it. Make sure the subject line says what you wanted to say. Please.
We can put all this in the email.
Pardon?
We can put all this in the
We'll
email.
put this all in an email, but just to make sure, the subject line needs to be what you mean, the major point. And then your email can go into the details. But it always helps to have a few faces in the audience, because what we have seen before is the diligent souls, the wonks among us, show up every time and say our 3 minutes worth. And they nod and say, yeah, thank you for coming. It's good to see you again. And then the 10,000 foresters show up at the last minute and say, oh, this is terrible. You're going to destroy my business and there's property rights issues and so on. So faces count too. So however much you can do that. Nobody's asking you to do something you can't do, but please do as much as you can do.
So as someone who hasn't read the language of the ordinances, is there exemptions for removal of non-native trees or invasive trees that you know of?
Yeah.
Yes.
Only relate to native trees.
Okay, and then also if we do want to leave the language, since you did say, it's very specific, can we just Google the ordinance titles and find it, or is it on the county website?
Yeah, it's on the
Okay.
website. Yeah.
Yes, as someone who likes to get into the
I
weeds of it.
also, Trish Tatarian, who's one of y'all, she created these summary tables.
Mhm.
So like the whole entire tree protection ordinance is in a 1 3-page table, which is fantastic. It's just so much shorter. So I think it might be smart for us to circulate those. Probably most people won't want to look at them, but some people will. I think we might be done.
I was going to say, we've worn you out.
Yeah. Thank you very much.